Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Marketers, Get Your Data House in Order. I'm Evan Schuman, and I'll be your moderator today. With any campaign for any one product or service, very few companies today use just a single marketing tactic or advertising approach. Although that theoretically increases the chance that something, somehow, will boost sales, it's also frustrating as it makes it more challenging to know for certain what specifically worked. Google Analytics 360 Suite just launched some extensive marketing surveys to try and quantify how companies are using data and analytics to better understand the impact of their marketing. But the beauty of the web and mobile today is that the volume and variety of data being created and captured gives marketers a huge ability to connect the dots, uncover insights, and make more informed decisions. Tauhid Zaman, KDD Career Development Professor in Communications and Technology, the MIT Sloan School of Management, has explored the viability of using some newer metrics. Consider, it now can be measured how long someone looks at an image before they take an action. This, again, in theory, allows interpretation to be far more sophisticated than simply whether or not an image was clicked. Professor Zaman is with us today, joined by Casey Carey, Director of Platforms and Publisher Marketing at Google Analytics 360 Suite. Between the two, we're going to try and get a handle on where marketing analytics stands today and where it's likely going to be tomorrow. Before we plunge into that discussion, a few administrative details. First of all, this event will be recorded, and it's going to be available to all attendees approximately 3 to 4 business days after the end of the live event. In addition, today's slides will be made available to attendees. We're going to welcome audience interaction. We welcome your questions for our speakers today. To submit questions, please enter them anytime in the chat box in the lower corner of your screen. Or you can submit questions on Twitter using the hashtag #MITSMR event. We'll answer as many questions as time permits. We're also going to be taking a couple of instant polls of the audience as time permits, and the instructions for that will come up as we get into that. If you are having audio difficulties while listening via computer, please call in via telephone instead, or you can simply check the help link in the upper part of your console. Our thanks go out to our sponsor today, Google Analytics 360 Suite. And we also are pointing out that this webinar was created by the MIT SMR Custom Studio in partnership with our sponsor. The MIT SMR editorial team was not involved in developing the content for this webinar. Let's jump in. So, Casey, let's start with you. Can you give us a big picture sense of the top-line findings from your survey?
Thank you, Evan. Happy to be here today to share these findings and really talk about how marketing's not what it used to be. It's actually kind of a running joke for me. Over the 10, maybe even last 15 years, it seems like we've always been saying marketing is becoming more complex. It's increasingly changing at a faster pace. There's more data, there's more technology, and we've literally been saying this for 15 years now, and frankly, I don't see it slowing down and or changing. So really the question is, if that's the status quo, if change is the status quo, what can we do to take advantage of that? What are our opportunities? And frankly, consumer behavior is a big part of this. One of the great things about working at Google is we spend a lot of time and effort trying to understand consumers and their behaviors. So I'd like to share with you an ethnographic study that we did 2 or 3 years ago to really understand this. Let me introduce you to Stacy. Stacy is a real person. She lives in Michigan. She's a mother of 2. And at the time, her and her husband were expecting a third child. And they decided that they needed a bigger car, either a minivan or a larger SUV, to kind of fit all 3 car seats that they were ultimately going to have. They're also pretty active families, so they had to have space for all their family's gear and what they wanted to do. And if you think about your own personal experiences of buying a car, it's a very high intent purchase. And most of us will spend quite a bit of time and effort making that decision. So asking questions like, which car is best? Clearly, Stacy and her husband think an SUV or a larger SUV or a minivan are probably their best choices. Of those choices, which one is right for them? Can they afford it? Obviously, is an important question for most of us. Where should we buy it? There's a lot of options. I can buy online. I can go to dealerships. And ultimately, am I getting a good deal? Am I getting a great price? Is the financing good? So if you kind of think about that journey for yourself in kind of a similar situations, you can relate to kind of trying to get the answers to those questions. And if you think about how mobile technology, digital technology has really changed how we interact with brands and information along these journeys, it's pretty amazing. So let's take a look at kind of Stacy's journey specifically. Once again, this was an ethnographic study. We basically do this with consumers where we watch over their shoulder or monitor their activity to kind of understand what they do. And throughout this journey, which occurred about over a 90-day period, Stacy and her husband had over 139 searches on Google. They watched 14 YouTube videos. They had 69 dealer interactions. They looked at 89 images and 186 manufacturer interactions on manufacturer websites. The thing that's really interesting about this journey is 71% of these interactions occurred on mobile devices. If you think about kind of the implications of that from a marketing and a data perspective, all those data points across devices, across a long period of time, interacting with different sources of information, endemic websites, manufacturer sites, etc. It's a pretty complex journey and tough to understand. But I think it really drives home the point that the consumer journey now is kind of front and center for us as marketers. And I think it's actually a really important pivot that we need to think about, and that is historically when we started, particularly in the digital world, but even in the offline world, whether it's direct mail or print or TV, marketing was very channel-centric. We thought channel first, I'm going to spend X dollars on TV, I need these number of GRPs against these audiences, and I would go do that. Today we see successful companies flipping that over and thinking journey first. Ultimately understanding that journey, what are those key touch points, what are those questions that are being asked, and how can I actually shape and inform that journey across channels to what ultimately is a better outcome for my business. So if you think about kind of this non-linear consumer journey and all this data that's being created, the question that comes up is, how do I deal with this as a marketer? How do I capture all this data? What tools and technology do I have available? And the good news is there's 5,381 tools available to you to solve this problem. This is a slide from Scott Brinker, the chiefmartech.com. And each year Scott does this survey of the marketing technology landscape. And interestingly, 3 years ago, there was about 3,000 logos on this slide. As I said, there's about 2,000 more this year. And if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I would have said, this is not sustainable. It has to consolidate. There's no way we can continue to do this. Clearly, we can. And I think there's kind of two important key drivers here. Actually now believe that we may be in actually early stages of this rather than kind of the waning stages. And it's for two reasons. One is just the amount of data and the complexity and opportunities there are to actually change what marketing looks like. Creates new opportunities for technologies such as this. Cloud computing actually has made it very easy to create a new platform around data and around technology. So the barriers to entry are much lower and continue to get lower for many of these companies. And then ultimately, I think as AI, machine learning, and some of the more advanced technologies that are in very kind of early stages continue to grow, we'll continue to see this landscape explode. So the good news is here we have lots of tools that are available for us. The problem and the challenges we have is how do we actually apply those? One of our survey points was really talking back to this point about user journeys across devices and across channels. So really kind of focusing on being able to understand each of those touch points, stitch them together, at the user level, and then use that data to ultimately drive our marketing campaigns. In order to get that more complete view, data is an important part of that. So we wanted to go out and actually survey the market and really understand what are leaders doing with data that's helping them succeed. So I'd love to share some of this data with you. First is really asking them what they see as their biggest analytics challenges. And kind of in both camps, 61% said they struggled to access and integrate they needed last year. And that's a pretty big number, almost 2/3 saying they don't feel like they're able to get access to and or integrate and use the data that they have available to them. And then secondly, if you kind of look forward and ask that similar question, the same number expect to continue to have those challenges going into 2017. The good news is that more and more marketing business leaders recognize that data is an important part of their business. So let's walk through the characteristics of kind of what it takes to be a leader. We looked at 700 marketing analytics executives at consumer brands, and basically we said we defined a leader by someone who hit or exceeded their goals in 2016. And so we kind of looked at the cohorts of leaders and non-leaders and asked them a handful of questions that have some very interesting insights. First is really kind of a great quote here in that data is a transformational tool. We hear a lot of conversation around digital transformation and the role of digital and as part of a culture, but I think kind of the foundation of those types of transformation is actually data, a learning culture, an innovative culture, one that's willing to take risks, measure results, iterate quickly, and have those capabilities and attitude as part of an infrastructure, right? So kind of slapping tools in place or putting signs on the wall that say we need to be data-driven aren't enough to actually become a leader. You actually has to be a core foundational component of the organization. If we look at kind of these leaders and some of the key statistics that define them, 1.5 are more likely to say that their marketing strategy is strongly data-driven. And for those of you out there who are brands or advertisers, kind of ask yourself that question. How strong would you say your strategy is based on data and data-driven? Equally, 1.5 are as likely to say their organizations have a clear understanding of consumers' journey, both across channels and devices. So if you're a consumer marketer, how do you feel about your capabilities in terms of collecting and understanding that data along that journey? 2 times are as likely to say that they routinely take action based on insights and recommendations. And that's kind of the next level step. Obviously, being data-driven implies that you're going to take action based on that data, but that's one of the challenges that many companies run into. And then 7 in 10 say, they're confident that data is used to support decision-making at all levels. So the leaders clearly over-index, have a bias towards not only talking a game about data, but actually living that game and driving success from it. We also found the majority of leaders already have a data strategy in place, right? So they've had the strategy in place, they've been executing against it. 2/3 of them indicated this. And I think that really speaks to the formalization of data as part of an overall business strategy and then pushing to make sure that it's realized across the organization. And then lastly, is that leaders are 127% more likely than the mainstream to say their data and analytics data is useful for decision making at all levels. I've been in situations personally where there's a lot of data, but it's not useful. I think the saying is data everywhere, not a drop to drink. But ultimately, making sure that we've put the processes and tools and people in place that actually allow that data to be used for decision making, not only very tactically, but ultimately strategically as well. So what do you do about this? What are our recommendations? I think there's kind of 3 key components of your data and analytics strategy that you need to consider. First, really starting at the high level, strategically identify specific business goals for your data strategy. Where are the areas that you have access to data that may be underutilized, that has high potential value? and really looking at those areas for initial development and some quick wins. But ultimately, what does that maturity curve look like from a data-driven organization, and what are the key initiatives that you can put in place to make that happen? Secondly is define how to integrate data and technology to make all this happen. Over the years, there's been a lot of promise, particularly in the marketing segment, about data integration and how we can leverage data. Frankly, as a marketer, that promise has been mostly undelivered, particularly by many of the vendors. So we're starting to make better progress there. It's hard, but ultimately kind of data level integrations, leveraging data when and where you need it to drive better decisions and better outcomes for the business is where real value can be created. And then finally, we see a lot of data strategy is built on having the organization embrace and use it. And part of making that happen is inviting collaboration and democratization of the data. So a lot of times the data sits in silos, people go do analysis, they come back with recommendations, and some action may or may not be taken. How can you actually open up that data so more people have access to it, more people can think about it and use it, and ultimately use it to create better decisions across the organization? So with that, before we dive into the next part, Evan, I think you had a brief question you wanted to ask.
Yeah, what I'd like to get a sense of is you made the 3 recommendations. Based on your interactions with a wide range of companies, where do you see most companies struggling? What part of that have you seen been the most difficult for a lot of companies to grapple with?
Great question. I think I think we all do this kind of naturally. We start with tools first, and we think that if we go spend some money with some vendors and we get some services, we can solve the problems. I think sometimes those are tactics in search of a strategy. So really, the ones that I see being successful start with the strategic view first, and then they kind of make their more tactical decisions. Second, I would say is just really the democratization and access to information and data across organizations has a long ways to go. I've presented at conferences and had people come up afterwards and say, that's all fine, that's amazing, but that will never happen at my company. We just don't have that kind of culture, right? So kind of fits back in part and parcel with the strategy comment, and that the culture has to match the strategy as well and support it fully. So those are kind of the 2 areas I would highlight.
Just one quick follow-up with that. Are you seeing a lot of confidence issues? In other words, that companies are using the data, they're analyzing it, but some senior managers are still hesitant to fully accept those recommendations and they go with their gut instead?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and this is particularly true in the marketing arena. Marketing data, kind of my running joke is this is marketing, it's not accounting, and that it's sometimes messy, it's not fully accurate, it's incomplete, but most often it's highly directional and relevant. So it's kind of back to that shift in culture and really being able to be okay with making decisions without having perfect answers, being able to take some risks, iterate as you learn, and taking much more of a test and learn approach to it rather than trying to achieve perfection out of the gate.
No, thank you. Well, Casey's given us a good sense of where things stand today, and now let's take a look at where things are likely going to stand tomorrow. Tauhid, what are you seeing the most intriguing parts of your research into marketing insights, things that are typically not being leveraged today?
Yeah, so my area of research is called behavioral analytics, and at a high level, it's basically trying to take data we produce by using different applications and try to understand how we feel about what we're seeing. So we have applications today, maybe things like Amazon where you buy stuff, or Facebook where you like different pieces of content, or maybe dating apps where you try to find a potential romantic match. And these provide us a service, right? Now, the app would work better if it could understand my sentiment towards the application. If I show me a face in a dating app, do I like that face or not? If it knew this, it could actually serve me better by showing me better things I might like in the future. And this is where behavioral analytics comes into play. Next slide, please. So behavioral analytics tries to bridge the gap between your sentiment. Oh, back one, please. Yeah. Between your sentiment and the data you produce using the application. And somehow take that data, put it through some kind of statistical model, and then figure out how do you feel about what you're seeing here. Next slide. So the basic data we get right now are clicks. So on Amazon, did you buy the product or not? In a dating app, did you like Ryan Reynolds or not? In Facebook, did you like this picture of my food at the restaurant or not? And a click is a very binary thing. So it's like yes or no. But if you understand, human sentiment, you know that sentiment isn't binary. It's a continuum. And there is a signal that we can measure today in these applications that actually gives you a better sense of this continuum. Next slide, please. So that's time. In particular, the response time to what you're seeing. So if I show you something, and then you look at it for a bit, then you respond to it after a certain amount of time, that delay tells me something about how you felt about what you saw. And here's an example of how. Next slide. So let's take, for example, the dating app Tinder. Okay, so I'm sure many of us have used this dating app, and it shows you faces, and if you like the face, you swipe right, and if you don't like them, you swipe left. So you might see Ryan Reynolds, the Crypt Keeper, and then some regular-looking person, and you might like Ryan Reynolds, you don't like the Crypt Keeper, and you're neutral about the third person, but you say yes. Why not, right? So as far as Tinder is concerned, you like the first person and the third person, and you didn't like the middle person. But with these clicks, that's all they really know about how you feel about these images. However, if they measure the response time, they might get a more refined picture. Next slide. So for Ryan Reynolds, you probably saw him, and you're like, oh, this guy's really good looking, and you'd swipe immediately. And the Crypt Keeper, right, not the best looking fellow, so you see his picture, and very quickly you're like, nope, not going to happen. But that third person, you're kind of on the fence, you don't know yes or no, you think about it, and you're like, yeah, what do I have to lose? And you say yes. So the fast response indicates like a strong sentiment, one way or the other, either a strong dislike or a strong like. But that slow response indicates some kind of indifference. So you said yes, but it's not really a strong yes. It's kind of like a meh, right? Now, that information is very useful to these applications because if they can quantify how much you like something, right, they can actually better serve you by showing you better things in the future. And the beauty about time data is that time data is already being recorded by these applications. It's just a lot of times not being used. So, for instance, Facebook measures dwell time on your different things they show you on the app, and they use dwell time to figure out what's popular. So they're one company actually making use of this temporal information. However, most companies actually don't utilize this time data to figure out how much people like stuff, and they totally could. Now, beyond understanding do you like something or not, time data tells you more about the individual at a deeper level. Next slide, please. And that's about engagement. So there's a problem that these dating apps have, like Tinder, where people are not really engaged with the application. So what they do is, and this is really true for men, and maybe myself sometimes, you just swipe right for everyone. So you see Ryan Reynolds, or the Crypt Keeper, or some regular person, you say yes, yes, yes. Okay? Now, that data I'm giving the app is actually noisy data. It's incorrect. It's biased by the fact that I don't care what I'm looking at. I'm just saying yes every time. So if the app could find a way to actually figure out that I'm giving them garbage data, they could remove my data and get a better picture of how popular the items are. Now, with just my clicks, you can't really tell that because maybe I'm a low engagement person, or maybe I actually like the Crypt Keeper because I like everyone. I'm just like, looking for anybody to match with. You can't differentiate those two with just the clicks. But with the time, you could see the difference because if I don't really care what I'm looking at, then swiping yes on Ryan Reynolds or swiping yes on the Crypt Keeper or a generic person, they should take a different amount of time if I'm paying attention. But if I'm not paying attention, it should be the same amount of time. And so the variance of my response times, if it's the same every time for every picture, super attractive or not super attractive or neutral, then you can figure out that this person doesn't really care what they're looking at. They're low engaged. Therefore, that data is like garbage data. Let's not use that to improve our application performance. So I can figure out engagement with the response times as well, in addition to your true sentiment towards an image. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's time data. Time data is available now. It's being used by a few companies now, but not really enough, and it gives you some deeper pictures about how people feel about stuff. Now, going forward, I think there's even cooler data we can measure that can be useful for marketing applications, and that data is biometric data. So in addition to the clicks or the likes or whatever, if I can also measure like how your brain is reacting to what you're seeing, or like how your heart is beating when you see something, I could get even a better idea of how you feel about what you're seeing. Next slide, please. Now, the cool thing is that biometric data is not some science fiction thing. In fact, today it's very, very easy to measure these kind of things using wearable biosensors, the smartwatches you probably have seen, I'm sure many of you actually own right now. These devices are very, very popular. I think today 1 in 6 people own a wearable device. Hundreds of millions are shipped every year. They're growing in popularity and in their measuring abilities. So you can imagine a world where everybody has a wearable device in the future, and their biometric data is being tracked. And what can they measure right now with these devices? Well, a whole bunch of things. So they can measure your motion, so how are you moving around. They can measure your heartbeat. They can measure your skin temperature. They can measure how much you sweat. They measure a lot of this data. They can measure it continuously all day long. And they connect to your smartphone to collect the data, which is the same place all your applications actually exist. So you can imagine an interface between applications and biometrics that tell you something about how the person's reacting to what they're seeing. And you can get some really deep psychological insights about how people feel about it. Next slide. So one cool thing you can actually measure about people is how much they sweat with these devices. And sweating is important because sweating is tied to your psychology. So there's this phenomenon called electrodermal activity. And this phenomenon says that your sweat glands are tied to your central nervous system. So when your mind gets mentally aroused or stimulated, you actually sweat more. And you can measure the sweat very, very easily with wearable devices. And the sweat becomes a proxy for mental arousal. So think about this, right? I'm showing you stuff in an application, and something kind of gets your brain's attention, and you're thinking about it, you're focusing on it. I can measure that attention just by how much you're sweating with a wearable device. So I'm actually really seeing how much you like it without even responding to it like physically by clicking or whatever, just how your body is responding to it with the wearable device. Next slide, please. So to kind of show the basic gist of what you can measure today and what it tells you, here's some raw data from a study of an MIT professor, actually me, at a day at work. And I kind of demarcated what different events were during the day. And that blue line there is the electrodermal activity. Think of that kind of like a measure of how stressed I was or how mentally focused I was at different times of the day. The higher that blue thing gets, the more focused I am. So first thing I want to point out is this collection went from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. So it's almost like a 12-hour span. It collected my data continuously. So battery-wise, these devices are already where they need to be in terms of like continuous data collection. And if you kind of go through my day, in the morning I had an early class, 8:30 in the morning. A little bit stressed out there, but then I was like getting the groove. I'm teaching the class. My body's relaxing. You see my stress come down. I teach another section immediately after that class, and I'm kind of in the zone, looking pretty relaxed. Then I get an hour break, go back to my office, and then I get some lunch. And lunch like arouses my brain because it's food, so I'm going up there. Then I'm teaching another section in the afternoon, and near the end of that section, I kind of get really aroused. I think because I was happy to be finishing up the teaching for the day, so I see the finish line, I'm getting excited. Then I go back to my office and do some academic work, reading papers, writing papers, whatnot, and I'm getting a little bit relaxed there. Then I have a meeting with my TAs to prepare the class for the next day. As you can tell, this meeting kind of stresses me out. I just like hate that meeting. It's a lot of work and worrying about this and the students and that, and you can see visibly like I'm getting stressed out by it. But then after that meeting, I go and see my junior faculty colleagues, and we just kind of hang out and it's chill and talk. You can see my body relaxing as that meeting goes on. So with this wearable device, I'm actually tracking my stress or mental arousal through the entire day. Now you can imagine if you're creative, applications sensing this kind of mental state I'm in, and then maybe serving me ads or giving me offers or doing something in response to how my stress level is changing throughout the day. Now, this is the technology today. The technology is changing every single day. It's getting better and better. More devices come out. So we can imagine in the next 5 years, you get really effective sensors tracking not just this data, but all kinds of data about me, and just understanding how I'm feeling in real time and responding to that. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the data future I'm envisioning, that we can measure about people how fast they're responding, how their body is responding. We can really understand how they feel about something going beyond just a click. Now, there's going to be some challenges with this. One major challenge is that this data is a lot larger than just a click. So a time series for a whole day takes up a lot more space than a click. Also, this data could have a lot of noise in it. It's not just a click data. So thinking about how to integrate that into your decision-making process requires some thought. How to handle that data, just how to store it, manage it, will require more effort, and you have to be careful about that. But I believe that overall, that this biometric data combined with this response time data is going to make these applications a lot more effective at serving us in the way we want to be served. Next slide. Oh, yeah, sorry. So, Evan, if you have any had a question for me on this?
Well, what I'd like to just get a sense is, how do companies deal with the misleading component of the data? In other words, someone takes a long time looking at a photo, they either were extraordinarily interested or they got a phone call during that, they're really not that interested at all. Since the data is presented without context, you don't really know what that person's doing. You're just getting either the biometric or the time readings. How do you deal with of eliminating the misleading data?
So I think there's two approaches here. So one approach is that in the future, you don't have just one data signal. You have multiple data signals coming in for a person. So you may have my physical stress, my response times, my motion, how my hand is oriented. You can measure my orientation of the hands, how I'm moving around. Combining all the different data streams can help you like disentangle, is this a reaction because of the quality of the item, or is it a reaction because of some other factor affecting how I'm feeling that day or something? So that's one thing, is that multiple data streams can help you reduce those kind of confounding effects. The second is that if you're making a decision based upon the data, you should make sure your decision-making process is robust to this kind of noise you're describing. So you shouldn't be hyperly sensitive to your data in making a decision. You should have some responsiveness to it, but knowing that it's very noisy, you should model that into your approach to respond to the data in a way that is robust to these kinds of outlier events that might actually give you the wrong signal. So a smart decision-making process and integrating multiple data signals can help mitigate the effects of kind of mistakes in the data.
So you're talking about a big data approach where you're looking at a volume of data for this particular consumer over time and trying to make better guesses as to what's meaningful and what's not.
Also, when you make a decision, make it in a way that's robust to the data. So if somebody spends like 5 minutes on a picture, that doesn't mean they're really, really into it. That means something else happened. Maybe you should model that into your system and not over-respond to a 5-minute view versus like a 5-second view. Take into account that there's effects there that cause these like extreme long times that aren't based upon the signal you're trying to capture.
No, excellent. I'd like to explore this a little back and forth with the panelists, but first, let's see where the audience is standing. So I'd like to jump to our first instant poll, which should be, in what marketing areas of your business are you using data analytics? So you can select all that apply. So your options are digital advertising, marketing strategy, direct marketing, email marketing or demand generation, offline advertising, print, TV, out of home, that sort of thing, or we're not currently using a lot of data analytics. So what is your take on that? So there are a bunch of different options here, and just one moment, and now let's take a look and see. Let's give another moment to see where we are at, and let's see where the audience is at this moment. So it looks like, there was basically a three-way tie. Digital advertising, marketing strategy tied for first and second at 48%, with direct marketing, email marketing, and demand generation right behind it at 46%. Interesting number that the next largest segment for almost a third, 31%, said we're not currently using a lot of data analytics at all, and the low-lier level would be offline advertising coming in at just 12%. So let's just turn to the panelists for a moment. Casey, is this what you would have expected from the audience?
So yeah, here's the data from our study. I think some of the kind of key aspects to point out here. Obviously, digital first and foremost. I think one of the big differences was the leaders have applied their digital strategy and their data chops to offline advertising, with 52% saying that the offline world is now strongly data-driven for them. So I think that's a big difference in what we saw in the poll.
Interesting. Any theories as to why that difference occurred?
I think from a strategic standpoint and just being, part of the culture, we see companies who are now, using digital signals to measure TV. And so they're basically able to measure and optimize placements in networks and programs, day parts, time slots, and length of programs and creative, just like they would a digital ad or a video ad on YouTube. So we're starting to see similar trends on digital out of home. So I think what we'll see is the offline world just being much more data rich and digital like as we go forward.
Tauhid, any thoughts?
Yeah, I want to echo that same sentiment. I mean, when I watch TV now, a lot of times I watch on like a smart TV, which records, the time I'm watching, my account when I'm logging in. They basically know everything about me as I'm watching the television programming. So I think like network TV might have a tough time like getting as this detailed data about who the audience is. But platforms like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, they basically know who is watching exactly, when they're watching, which room they're watching in, maybe in the future possibly. So I think TV can really become much more data-driven in the near future, at least like the newer applications of television.
Yeah, totally agree. In fact, I think at some point TV is just a device for viewing, and it's really about video streaming, regardless of what device you're watching that on.
Like the networks figure this out. They have all their content now streaming on the internet. You can watch TV shows on the website. That's so they can basically see who you are as you watch them, versus your like TV box.
Let me throw a question to both of you, and this is based on Tauhid's presentation. Tauhid, how much resistance do you expect companies to give in terms of using biometric data? I'm not just talking about the technological limitations implementing that and bringing that data in. I'm talking about whether it's privacy concerns, whether they're worried about the analytics accuracy. What challenges do you see in going there? So how many companies do you think are going to do it, and what are the hurdles they're going to have to overcome?
So there are actually a lot of companies now using wearables for their workers, and it's mostly for like safety purposes. So maybe it's workers on an oil rig or something like that. I know Google Glass is a device used in like a lot of industries for like worker safety, things like that. So if it gives you some safety benefit, then they might be okay with it. I can speak for my own self. I'm currently doing a field study with a hedge fund, and they basically agreed to have their traders wired up for the whole summer and track their biometric data while they're trading, and then compare their profits and losses versus their biometric data. So there's some curiosity in finance to actually apply this data and these devices to their workers to kind of identify top trading professionals. So there's interest in some areas where there's either high risk or high reward involved. Going forward, with privacy, my general sentiment is that at first people might feel kind of weird about it, and then within like a year or 2 years, they don't care. And then the convenience and the benefits you get from the data analytics kind of outweighs the privacy concerns people have. I've seen this with social media. If you guys have like younger kids or younger relatives, they post everything online. They don't care. Like privacy isn't like a concern for the younger generation. So I think it's just an issue that goes away over time, and that for better or worse, that's what I've seen as a trend with society.
I'm going to bring Casey in just a moment, but Tauhid, just to clarify on the privacy issues, there are two elements to that. One, you have got actual privacy concerns, which is what you just addressed, that a lot of the younger generation has far fewer such concerns. But then you've got the perception of concerns with executives who think that people are, however concerned they might perceive. In other words, there is a perception issue that privacy for certain demographics is higher than for others. So you talked about the reality. What about the executive perception?
My sense is that if they see a clear benefit from this technology in their organizations, and they can ensure the privacy of the data for their workers, so they can kind of say that no one's going to leak this information, it'll be only used for our internal purposes, it may not be that big a deal. Maybe right now it sounds kind of sci-fi-esque and kind of, strange and not normal, but I feel like with time, that kind of stigma will just dissipate. And this is kind of evidence from the growth of wearables as an industry.
Yeah.
Casey, any thoughts on the bigger issue of using the kind of biometric and time tracking data that Tauhid mentioned?
Yeah, I guess a couple of thoughts. I mean, obviously, privacy and security has got to be a critical part of any data strategy, especially if you're a well-known brand and a market leader. There's a lot of risk associated with making mistakes in that area. So it's always got to be important. Tauhid's right. Over time, the definition of privacy and security changes given any one particular topic. 15 years ago, they never would have allowed tying offline purchase data to online advertising data. Today, that happens kind of as a matter of course. So things do change over time. I would say, obviously it's a big part of the strategy. And then ultimately, I think some of the things that Tauhid show are very interesting in that they kind of look at this overall view of understanding consumer behavior along some sort of journey or towards some sort of outcome. And today we do a decent job of that, looking at impressions and clicks and page views and things like that in the digital world. And you just basically, showed a great vision for extending that model to encompass new and different types of data that can make it even more accurate and more relevant for the end user.
Casey, one other question on your presentation. At one point you were talking that the survey had determined that 70% of users said they were using data. How high is your confidence that 70% of companies are doing that? And to clarify, that they're meaningfully using data rather than just using it on the periphery?
I would say fairly high. These are the leaders, so this is the cohort that tends to be more mature in their approach and kind of more committed to data as an overall strategy. So I'd say fairly high confidence in that. And it does vary, right? There's maturity curves in every organization in terms of their ability to use and leverage this data in effective ways. We deal a lot, obviously, with both large enterprises as well as SMBs, and you'll see the maturity spectrum across those. The larger enterprises in some industries like retail, financial services, travel, are pretty high on the maturity curve. Others tend to be more towards the middle.
In just a moment, we're going to go to audience questions. So audience, please, if you have questions, please throw those in there. We're going to get to as many as we can. We just want to do our second instant poll here and, again, get a sense of where the audience is at. So we have got, how often does your marketing organization take action based on the insights and recommendations of analytics? So how often do you actually do it? The options are, and we need to ask you to please select just one for this one: routinely, frequently, sometimes, infrequently, never. So that's where we are at. And just give a little more to vote here. And okay, we'll give a few more seconds. And let's see where the audience is at. So let us take a look here. Okay, so interesting. Sometimes, an always popular option in these surveys, but sometimes came in as the top option, 34, with frequently coming in as the second option at 25, infrequently close behind it. So you've got infrequently and frequently coming in with 2 points of each other, infrequently coming in at 23, routinely at 16%, and interesting, at least we have a bit of optimism here, never came in at just 2%. So hardly anyone opted for never, which is at least a good concern. Let's go back again to the panel. What is your take on that? 1 second. What is your take on those answers? Casey, let's start with you. What do you think this all means?
Actually, I think it's a pretty representative distribution of what we've seen. I think what you'll see in the data that from our surveys, the leaders tend to skew more towards routinely and frequently, about 75%, and kind of skew down from there. So it looks like, generally speaking, our audience is a pretty even distribution, whereas the leaders will actually skew more towards more frequent use of the data. My question would be for the 2% that don't know or never do it. Wow. Anyway, sounds like a great place to work. We should all try that.
That's not really a question. Wow was more of a statement.
True. No, it was wow, question mark.
Tauhid, what was your take on the audience's answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sign of the times we're living in. I mean, the world has changed. I mean, if I can tell a personal story, my education is in engineering. I have a PhD in electrical engineering, computer science, but I teach in a business school. And people ask me, why did you go from engineering to business? Like, what happened to you? It's nothing happened to me. I just kept doing what I'm doing. The world changed. The world realized that, oh, we can measure everything and use that to make better decisions. Let's do that. So it's the 2% that's there. I'm sure that if we do this webinar in like a year or two, that might be a 1% or a 0%. It's just like you can measure everything nowadays. And so almost every industry will be touched by data in some way in the near future. And it's just the world we're living in now. It's an analytics world.
Yeah, particularly marketing. I kind of think marketers now have to be part technologist, part analyst, part creative, and part strategic. And it is what's required to be successful.
Okay, so now let's turn to some of those audience questions. We've got a lot of them, some interesting questions. Let's start with this. This comes presumably from an engineer, and the question is, we engineers are always willing to put technology to use, often without seeking the difference between what we can do versus what we should do. How do you consider questions of what you should not do in spite of being able to do it? I'd call this the Jurassic Park question. They ask the question of doing versus what you should do versus what you can. Tauhid, what do you think?
So I guess for me, in my personal research, I kind of have this mad scientist kind of view that we should just try everything and see how it works. But if you're in an organization, right, you have to be more careful about these things. And I feel that it's important to understand what your goal is from the beginning. Like, what do you want to do in the end? And then use the data to kind of achieve those goals. But at a high level, the goal should be clear what it is you actually want to do. Because if you have the wrong goals, that can lead you to places where you might do some improper things with your data that may be ethically questionable. So it's important to have leadership to kind of lay down, this is what we're doing. Let's be clear that our actions are aligned with these overall goals.
Casey?
Yeah, I would generally agree. I think there's a saying something like, be committed to your vision, but be flexible about the details, and kind of supporting that, test and iterate and try, but making sure those things you're doing are aligned with that vision and that overall strategy.
The next question talks about home-based devices, and the question is, how do you think systems like Google Home, Amazon's Alexa, etc., will affect the nature of digital marketing in terms of analytics? So now that you have access to home data beyond the actual device, beyond the mobile device, beyond the laptop, how do you see that playing into it? Let's start with Casey.
Yeah, very fascinating question. I think this is one of those where we're very early innings of the game. There's a lot potential and a lot that can be done here. Initially, voice-based search is kind of the new interface for search, if you will. So it starts changing the model of, at least from a marketing perspective, of what we thought of in terms of paid search, organic search, kind of interaction with brands and information that's available on the internet, and that there's no longer a page with a bunch of results listings that the marketer can pay and or work to be listed on, right? So it kind of changes a lot of those fundamental models that digital marketing is built on today, or at least I think enhances some of the opportunities for different interactions and type of interaction points with those consumers that are A, more relevant, and B, probably more valuable ultimately to the marketer.
Let me ask you, Casey, just the most frightening aspect of those devices, which is the always listen mode, and all of the fear that consumers are having that if it's always listening, is it going to be considering things that I don't want to tell it that it overheard in the room?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid question. I'm not super close to the privacy and policy aspects of those devices, at least from a Google perspective. So I kind of look at it more from a marketing and consumer perspective. I think back to our conversation around ultimately the user will decide what's private and what's not. They should have and those controls and understand how the data is being used and being able to change those settings to whatever they're comfortable with. I think that's a minimum requirement. And this creates some new complications and some new areas that I think have to be worked out, but I think the current models apply.
Tauhid?
Yeah, so about these in-home devices, I can kind of speak from personal experience. So when I first got my Amazon Alexa, people are a little bit weirded out by it. Like, oh, what is that robot? You're talking to it? Is it listening to me? Like, people are like real like apprehensive about it. Maybe 2015. Now those same people, they come to my apartment. The thing is there. We're like joking about, oh, it's hearing us talk to it. We yell at the Alexa. We swear at her. We don't care anymore. We just like it just became like a normal part of our lives. So what began as like apprehension just became like, yeah, they're listening. Whatever. Bezos knows. Who cares? We just, because it's so convenient. It plays music for us, gives us alarms and everything. So humans just seem to sacrifice their privacy for convenience every single time this ever happens. We just never fail to seek convenience. And I just feel like in the beginning, if you could survive the beginning kind of pushback you get on a new technology that's, supposedly invading your privacy, eventually, if it can provide a convenient service for people, they will accept it and they won't care.
Now we've got a different audience question, a very different topic, more of a corporate strategy issue. Can you explain the pros and cons of having a entirely separate strategy for data and analytics versus including data and analytics within various parts of the overall business strategy? Casey, what is your take on that?
Great question. I think you can make a case for either one pretty easily. I think if you're just starting out and you have a lot of runway that you need to cover, you may actually want to make it a single focused initiative or strategy just to provide that level of exposure and focus on it. That's over time, you probably get to a point where it's now kind of part and parcel to everything you do. And then you kind of fold it back into your other strategies as kind of just key initiatives or key things that are making that strategy happen. So I think it depends on where you're at from a maturity standpoint, but my recommendation was if you really want to move the needle, bring it up to the top level of your strategies, put sufficient resources and focus on it, create a cadence of accountability, and then make it happen.
Tauhid, any thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that the data kind of in the future permeates every aspect of the decisions you make in a corporation. And so it's important to understand that how can data improve the decisions I'm making at every different level. So data should maybe be a separate thing in the company, but it should be integrated with like every facet that you make a decision in a corporation. That it basically can improve everything you're doing, and it's not like a separate silo unit. Like it's not the nerds over there doing their thing. It should be integrated with everything you're doing because it can just make things more effective. So it shouldn't be separate. It should be like part of the mix.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. You may initially start in some areas where it's centralized, but ultimately your goal should be to decentralize it into every aspect of the business.
Yep.
There's a related audience question which seems to be dealing with recruiting and personnel issues. So the question is, what about building internal analytic capabilities? What competencies are most needed and how to develop the team? So that's the a very interesting recruiting issue. And Casey, let's again start with you on that one.
Yeah, it's another great question. It's hard right now. Data is the new black, and so and kind of the educational systems and the kind of focus is trying to catch up with the demand in the marketplace. So it's great to see. We'll see now. There's literally dozens of educational institutions offering masters and degrees in data and analytics and things like that. Data science is now a big part of the curriculum. So we're catching up, but there's huge demand. I think it depends on your business in terms of what makes sense for you. Some of this can be outsourced. You may want to build a team inside. It depends on your overall strategy. I think if you think about it specifically from a marketing perspective, you need to decide whether that sits within the marketing org or it sits within maybe a finance and operations org, and then kind of dotted line reports. You got to figure out kind of what the right structures are for you and how to best apply it. But I think I would say if you believe it's a big part of your strategy, then you kind of have to look down the pipeline and figure out ways to make sure that both internally you're providing opportunities in education, but also how can you fill that pipeline over time. So actually, just one of the things we found, Karen just shared this with me, that one of the biggest barriers for the leaders around data and analytics is actually education, training, and getting the talent and resources. And as president of the Digital Analytics Association, I can tell you that's true. At a symposium, we'll ask how many people are looking for analysts and data science people. Almost everybody raises their hand. We'll ask how many people are looking for jobs. Nobody raises their hand. So there's a lot of demand out there.
Well, for the last word, we actually have got an MIT professor right here. So Tauhid, you can speak for the entire U.S. educational system. Are you producing enough analytics talent to fulfill the needs of companies? And if not, are students interested in pursuing that? There are certainly jobs out there.
Yeah, great question. So the answer is that there's definitely a hunger for analytics now all over the world. MIT responded to this recently by creating this Masters of Business Analytics degree program, which basically teaches people in the business school basic analytics skills, statistics, optimization, coding, and like at MIT, I've seen this change over the past decade because I've been here since 2001 as a student. So back in those days, business school was like a different world. It was like not a part of real MIT. It was like kind of looked down upon the business school back in the day. But I can say now, like, it's totally different. Like, the school of Sloan has a lot of analytics courses. The kids here are hungry to learn analytics, to learn the coding. Like, I'm in an MBA class teaching, like, statistics and coding and optimization. It blows my mind sometimes, like, the things the MBAs want to learn. So there's a hunger for it. We are creating new courses to teach these kids analytics. And it's everywhere now. It's in the business school. It's in the sciences. It's just everywhere. And the schools are responding. MIT is definitely responding, and I just think we're not responding fast enough. Like, there's too much hunger out there. We need more classes to teach these kids. They want to learn.
I think we'd love to explore that further. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's Q&A session. Over the next few days, please look out for a feedback survey we're going to be sending via email. We greatly appreciate your thoughts and opinions. And this concludes this portion of our program. Thank you again to our presenters, Casey Carey, Director of Platforms and Publishing Marketing at Google Analytics 360 Suite, and Tauhid Zaman, KDD Career Development Professor in Communications Technology at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and of course, our sponsor, Google Analytics 360 Suite. A reminder that a recording of this program and the presentation slides will be available within 3 to 4 business days. Thank you so very much for attending our program today. Thanks again.